Welcome to Learning and Teaching Systemic Therapy podcast, the official Society for the Teaching of Marriage and Family Therapy, STMFT in short, podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sofia Georgiadou. I created STMFT in this podcast as an antidote to the isolation I experienced as an early career academic. I also created STMFT in this podcast as a space to allow myself and my colleagues to share resources and bridge the way we do systemic therapy with the way we teach systemic therapy in our classrooms. Today, I have an amazing discussion lined up for you. Our discussion features questions I sourced from a PhD in MFT student and an experienced MFT professor who's navigated academia for several years now, and she's here to share her insights. Here with us today, we have Dr. Tatiana Melendez-Rhodes. She's an associate professor in the Marriage and Family Therapy program at Central Connecticut State University. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist in Connecticut, a clinical fellow of the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, an AMFT-approved supervisor, and a fellow Fulbright scholar like me. She received her master's and doctoral degrees in marriage and family therapy from the University of Connecticut. She was also a clinical psychologist in Peru. Dr. Melendez-Rhodes has taught several graduate and undergraduate courses of marriage and family therapy, supervision, and psychology in the United States and Peru. Dr. Melendez-Rhodes has worked in public hospitals, inpatient psychiatric hospitals, private practice, and outpatient mental health organizations in the U.S. and Peru. Her research interests focus on family violence, immigration issues, interpersonal acceptance or rejection, couples therapy, clinical practice and outcomes. She has published in peer-reviewed journals and presented her research at national and international conferences. Welcome, Dr. Melendez-Rhodes.
Thank you. Hi, Sophia. Thank you so much for inviting me. Very happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. The PhD student we have with us today is Shazia Imran. She's a co-founder and CEO at NTL Laboratory. Shazia holds a Bachelor of Science in Biology and Psychology from Loyola University Chicago, and a Master of Science in Marriage and Family Psychotherapy from Northwestern University. She's currently a doctorate student at Adler University. In addition to her advanced degrees, she has many certifications, including yoga-informed psychotherapy and financial decision-making from one of the elite universities in Chicago, the University of Chicago. Currently, she's doing her clinical practicum through Live Oak, helping couples and families with many different areas of life. In the past, she worked in the community setting for the state of Illinois as an on-call psychotherapist for all North Side hospitals of Chicago. She has done a tremendous job in the community and at NTL Laboratory. All for the past 8 years, she has served multiple roles in the company. In this episode, we'll be exploring questions that I pre-sourced from Shazia. Thank you, Shazia, for being here today.
You're welcome. Thank you, Sophia. And thank you, Dr. Melendez, for your time today.
Thank you so much, Tatiana.
Wonderful. So I'll be facilitating the conversation by sharing these questions, and I'm excited to hear Shazia's perspectives, and we'll discuss some lessons learned with Dr. Melendez-Rhodes. So without further ado, let's dive into our first question. Dr. Melendez-Rhodes, can you share your journey of moving to the U.S. and transitioning into teaching systemic therapy, and what challenges did you encounter along the way?
Well, I came to the U.S. to pursue my master's in marriage and family therapy at the University of Connecticut. It was a very interesting process because I came here as a Fulbright scholar, and just that by itself, it was very challenging. And, I was under a lot of pressure for performing, and it was the first time that I was living abroad, or I was going to live abroad. And, the initial challenges was the difficulty with language, financial challenges to some extent, because I was not able to work outside of the university.
Right.
I felt very homesick, right? It was a change in lifestyle, cultural shocks, just in general, everything at the same time. And it was very difficult to navigate because it's interesting because it's like I didn't have time to be thinking too much about it because I had to be overly focused on my studies. I receive a lot of support. I feel very fortunate for the people, that I interacted with. That was students or students, faculty as well. After that, I continued my studies at UConn and I got a PhD in MFT. And then during my doctoral studies, before I completed it, I worked, like most people that are doing their doctoral, I work as a teaching and research assistant. That was my first exposure to working with undergraduate students. Mm-hmm. I did grading, reading discussions, etc. It was interesting, because I have to learn how to grade, how to provide feedback, how to run the conversation, what happened, with some people perhaps spoke more time than others, etc., etc. So it was a whole learning experience, and I was just beginning, my career. Then this experience was definitely very rewarding. I learned a lot about teaching. But at that moment, also, I was completing other things. And in the middle of my studies, I was offered the opportunity to teach in a graduate program to teach MFT. So this was going to be my first job while I was doing my finishing or completing my doctoral studies. So I decided to do it. As I remember now, is I was thinking, should I do it or should I not do it? Because at the same time, I was completing my dissertation. I was completing my clinical hours for my doctoral studies, and then I had to teach several courses, basis courses, advanced courses, and provide supervision as well. I think that the challenge in here were trying to, I was not the person who was doing work as a teaching assistant and having just my mentor there and looking all my work. I have to do everything by my own, and I have to create syllabus. I have to develop syllabi. I have to think about what I wanted to convey in my classes, how I was going to do it. It was my first time ever teaching graduate studies, the graduate level. So it was very, very challenging. I received good mentorship, at that time. I think that is very, very important. I feel very fortunate that I had the experience and I had the opportunity also to have people who trust my abilities, who saw something that I was able to offer. And I took this opportunity as a challenge, and I took this opportunity in a very positive way. And that's how my academic career started many years ago.
I actually experienced similar things like Dr. Melendez Rhodes, where when I first moved here, I had to face many challenges. And I moved here when I was 19 years old. And so I had to apply for my bachelor's degree, and just like getting into the, the admission setting and like taking tests. And I had to go to take additional tests because English definitely was not my first language. And I had to face many challenges and throughout the educational system where I had no idea what they meant by research papers that I had to submit. And I was like, what is that? I never did that. But back home in my country, I was born and raised in Pakistan. So in Pakistan, we did a lot of essays, but everything was handwritten, and there was not a lot of use of computer or typing and things like that. So everything we ever learned was we did a lot of math. So that was my biggest strength. But writing English language essays was definitely a big challenge. And just like the whole process took really long, and I had to go through additional layers of testing as a student applying for the similar program, whereas students here in the US didn't have to go through who did their high school here. So these were initial challenges that I faced. And then I actually did teach elementary school back home because you can actually do that while you're in college. But when I moved here, I was just a student. I felt that loss of like not having that authority to not only like be an educator, but also like now I need to learn everything all over again. So, the phase wise, like I went from this huge, I'm teaching, I'm mentoring, I'm talking to other faculties, and here I am in the new country already facing other challenges like navigating immigration issues and things like that. And then also now I'm a student, so I'm learning so many new things. But I did have really good support for some of my peers and also the faculty who were helping me with the admissions process. But at the same time, there were people who just didn't communicate with me about anything and just expected me to be on the same level as all other students here. So it was very challenging in the beginning.
Yeah, I think you're describing the hidden curriculum, what is called the hidden curriculum in the literature in these days, perfectly, Shazia. All of the implied knowledge that we're supposed to have arriving from a different environment into the US. I wanted to circle back to Dr. Melendez-Rhodes and ask specifically when it came to teaching your first few classes of systemic therapy. I'm curious, what resources do you remember using at the time? Did you have a class about pedagogy or teaching in your PhD program? Or what were some of the initial resources that you used to design your courses? Like, what was your inspiration? I'm curious to know.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. But before I move to the answer, I want to thank Satya, for her insight and for, sharing the experiences. I think that's very interesting. I have, I could respond and we could continue this conversation for because
that's our podcast too.
As I was listening, it immediately brought some memories, So I'm gonna answer
Thank you.
the question. You're very welcome. Answer the question from Sophia. Well, I have to say that I was a very good student when I was in my undergraduate course. And I had to be, as in a competition for a Fulbright, award. That is the expectation. And, also taking so many tests and being able to do everything and etc. I was used to put a lot of effort into my studies. And I think that translated into the effort that I put to prepare for my classes as well. I have to say that I was extremely concerned, scared. I talked to my mentor at that time, and I remember telling her, do you think I'm going to be able to do it? And, are you sure I'm going to be able to do it? Yes, you will, and having that reassurance, having a person that actually trusts you, being an international student, because, at that time I was an international student. I wasn't, a faculty member. So part of the resources was, a good mentorship. And second aspect of this was a library. I spent several hours at the library just trying to create, a good, compelling syllabi. And I learned through time, that I had to adjust myself. Just as an anecdote, back in my country, we have a small library, a very small one, for psychology. But I do remember that every book that came in, we tried to get it. People were making copies and trying to read it. So when I came here, I read some of the book that some I used even for my own training, but in Spanish, of course. When I was here, I remember I came for my Fulbright. They took us to a university and they showed us a library. The library was a 4th-floor building, and I was just in shock that such a thing existed. So that was kind of like my favorite places. And talking about privilege, I say, so here you have all this access to all this book, whatever you want. I remember hearing like, oh, you want a particular article, you just let us know and we will find it for you. I just couldn't even believe it. So based on my excitement, I created sometimes some syllabi with like 8, 9, 10 readings. And I got, and I got feedback, from a student. Like that was just beyond the expectation. So part of my learning, as a faculty is what just to being able to learn how much is too much, how or what you can assign maybe as an optional readings. But I was coming from a place in which I didn't have those resources. And I'm coming to a place in which there are those resources. So let's use those resources, right? You don't leave everything out. So it was very challenging for me to pick and say, okay, which one, no? So that was something I think I can share that it was, I think I find it funny now, but when I actually received the feedback, it wasn't that funny. Then for me, what is worked well, I always ask the question, what do I want to get out of this? What I want my students to learn? What is the ultimate goal? So looking at, for example, the entire curriculum so that I make sure that the content does not necessarily overlap with other courses or how do they complement each other? So what is missing? So I like to see syllabi, that were prepared by other professors too, and see perhaps, some readings on some specific content. So whether or not I wanted to have my students develop specific skills, if there was some background in previous courses, etc. As for feedback, I think that mid-term evaluations are very important. And for me, it was critical, so I asked people intentionally, what do you think? How am I doing? How can I get better? But this is something that we need to do throughout our career, no? So it doesn't really have an expiration date. So I think it's very important to be intentional. People like have some conceptual map, to see what are the main concepts I want my students to learn? What are the skills that I want them to develop, to learn, to be exposed to? I think it's very important to keep the expectations clear because, when we are at the school, we believe that we will learn all these skills maybe in one semester. And it's just an introduction pretty much to everything that people will be doing. You will get the initial training, but, patience and other things needs to be in place to make that happen. So I think that's when we're teaching also, we need to focus on the motivational component, so visualize what I wanted to do. So those were the initial, just in general, resources. I read a lot. I tried to look at videos. I tried to see material that's kind of like it's applicable to different learning styles too. Experiential exercises, works that students can do at an individual level, group level. They, providing themselves feedback, etc. So those were the things that I did. One of the things that I like to do even now too, and back in the day, I found videos, for example, that had portrayed families or situations, that's from different cultures. Because what I learned for myself as being an international person, when you do a transition from one country to another, there are some privileges that you lose, right? And there are other things that you gain as well. So it happened to me, when I was listening to Shazia. In my case, I was already a clinical psychology with a degree with a title. I came here and I became the student. I was already used to, I had my own private practice and I came here to do a different type of work at the very beginning. Things, for example, understanding. To me also, this was very important, bringing examples from my own culture, in class. So how things work there. For example, I talk to my students about, let's say, privilege or social class on poverty. What is considered poverty here is not the definition of poverty in Peru. So like what is, for example, the highlight of the social class, like let's say, for example, languages in some specific culture is part of define your social class, the more languages you speak. Here might not necessarily be seen that way, right? Same way with concepts like, for example, poverty. So a person might not have, some specific thing, but might be driving, might have a car, with the total opposite of that. So I think that giving a student those opportunities, for having discussions and even case studies that incorporate those kind of situations, give them a good opportunity to reflect, to discuss, to say, or just, say how they would do things, based on their current reality. So I think that that's how I try to translate my professional and personal experience. I like to use sometimes, my own self too. And I mean, you can call it resources if you will, but you want, but in my case, for example, I like to share times in which I fail. Successful times, but at the same time, when I myself, I fail, like, for example, I might be teaching ethics and I think that I should have not done, or, I did, but there was more step to be completed. And sometimes happen because I didn't have the full story or I didn't know. So we discussed about the importance of, being a little bit more detail oriented in some situations. As part of, was my own training, personal training, yet even before I came here, I utilized everything I learned before and then, I apply it here too with everything that I learned here. I value, the feedback also that I received from my mentors and colleagues.
Yeah, I'm very curious about the feedback you received from mentors, because were they also not US born or were they US born educators?
I have, thankfully, I have my mentors were here. I have colleagues from here, but I have also colleagues who, came from different cultures. And I always told them, please tell me the truth. Don't tell me things just to make me feel good. And, and, just tell me everything is great or wonderful. And you say, these are areas that probably you can improve. Some people were more direct than others, and sometimes, I mean, let's be honest, at the very beginning might not be the great thing that you hear, but at the end, I think that it really helped you, to look at things from a different perspective. What we do with evaluation too, right? Course evaluations. I mean, not everything might be necessarily great, but at the same time, I think we need to be careful not to let that to define who we are and what we can bring, to the class.
Shazia, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that, how some of the things that I've also experienced, and Tatiana mentioned that, and it's great because she's absolutely right. Like in the beginning, because as she was talking, I was also like recalling some of the previous, like early memories of me, like in class, just like learning. And I remember my very first paper that I wrote and I submitted, it was about 8 pages long paper. And at that time, 8 seemed so much, right? And I was only 19 and a half years old. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to somehow make it 8 pages because that was the requirement, right? I go in and I said, before I submit, I want my teacher to give me feedback. And I still, till this day, remember the teacher as well as the paper. And I still have it saved on my computer because the feedback that I got was that my 8-page paper turned out to be only 2 pages. And he literally grabbed a pen and on top of my paper, he said, this is all extra. Moving on to the next page. You don't need to write this. This is not important. The 3rd page, you need to expand that. And then 4th page, there's a lot of grammar errors. You need to have some connections and some transitions here. And then I remember walking out of my teacher's office and I was crying. And he asked me, I still remember his name, Dr. Bonvicini, and he said, why are you crying? And I said, because I am happy and I'm sad. And he said, why are you sad? And I said, let me tell you why I'm happy first. And he said, why are you happy? And I said, I'm happy because I got great feedback, but I'm sad because the requirement is still 8 pages. How I'm going to make a 2-page paper now to 8 pages. So a lot of feedback, which really developed me as, grew me as a person, as a student, as a therapist, and also as a mother too, because I have kids and I have family, and I want to be a good example for them that whatever you go through, this has become part of your life experience. So every experience, negative or positive, has meaning and does help you in your journey along the way. So I remember like the most I learned from all my teachers who were very, very strict with me. I learned the most because they taught me things that I was not ready to hear. And they also taught me things that it's okay to hear negative feedback. And what you get out of that feedback is one day will become positive, and you should look at it in a way of as a learning journey. And that's what I did. I learned a lot from my professors, my actually my colleagues, and also my supervisor, especially at Northwestern. One of the best supervisors that I had, Corina Matson, she was my group supervisor there at Northwestern. And I remember seeing clients the very first time, and I had no idea what I was doing because all I was told was, you have new clients and now you're going to start seeing them next week. And it was just very hard for me to like, because I never done therapy before, right? And especially therapy for in English was so much different than what I have learned and what I have seen in my country, which was, of course, in Urdu. So it was a different language, different cultural background, also diverse background, because I worked with multiple, modalities with couples, sometimes with families, and also young kids and older people. And so I've done it all. But it definitely takes a lot of courage, and which definitely, Tatiana, you mentioned about the courage part, that you never gave up. So I think it's really important to have that hope that what you will see the results. So always being hopeful and also being open to feedback, I think, is really important. And along the way, you know your ways, right? So what I also learned, that things that were not helping me out, I was in the beginning was just very scared and honestly fearful to like say that this is not helping me, but I would be quiet. But what I learned along the way, that it's really important to have voice. So things that don't really sit well with you, you should actually discuss that. And I think that's what we do in therapy. And when we're learning about our clients, we may not always find everything that they're trying to tell us, but sometimes there are things that you need to ask follow-up question, and you can come from a curiosity perspective. And that's what I do in my life too, even with my kids. When my 10-year-old comes home and tells me something happened at school, I always say, okay, so tell me what you felt about it, right? And this is just to initiate the conversation and good feedback.
You're gonna some really emotionally intelligent kids. I can already see it. That's awesome. They're gonna start recognizing, like using the feelings wheel and everything. Lots of good info has already been shared. Thank you both so much. Dr. Melendez-Rhodes, I'm curious, when you think of maybe some of your most favorite ways that you challenge your students when you teach systemic therapy, you spoke about, giving them case studies and kind of making them think like how things might be different in different contexts. I'm wondering if you have any favorite activities or reflections that you invite them to have as part of assignments or assessments. Maybe specific ways that you are challenging them because it's you and that's your didactic style.
I think that I cannot specifically tell you this activity promotes this, because I find, let's say, magic or great moments, and in conversations, for the most part, in discussions in class. I might pose a specific questions or a situation, and then, it's very interesting to see that dynamic in the classroom when different students start participating in one, start challenging the other one, but at the same time promoting collaboration. So I'll give you one example. So we have recently been using simulation And, it's a very good tool, to use for learning purposes and developing and increasing clinical skills. But at the same time, it could be extremely challenging. Like, for example, most of the time we do role plays in the classroom, but everybody know each other, and it's kind of like, sometimes when the professor is close by, everybody just say what they believe we might want to hear. But when it comes to simulation, so everything is unexpected, right? And I think that's what I really like to do is we are discussing theoretical component is instill hope, and like help the students to believe in themselves, in their own skills. Avoid comparison, comparing themselves with one another, because each of them is unique. Each of them bring important aspects to the section of themselves and their own skills. And as hard as this might be to believe that when they are starting, but I think that reassuring, discussing, talking about those things, let things don't work, because in reality, every time that we work with clients, we might get stuck, regardless of how much experience we have in the field. So being stuck should be normalized. And I like to have a discussion about all those things, because it's reality. And, when you accept yourself from a perspective in which you don't have to portray yourself as being perfect, as being successful and move the session so smoothly, because it's not necessarily it's going to be that way. So I like the process, towards the end, in which when you see them doing things, or when or an assignment that it looks so complicated at the very beginning, now that they have trust the process, that they had more experience, they are more capable of doing it. And they do it in a way in which actually is good at the level in which they are in. So I think that reassurance motivate them discussing, reflecting, normalizing negative experiences within the therapy room also. It is important. And I mean, that's more of a personal style that I have, that I'm sure that many colleagues might have some similar or variations of those. That's what I like to use. I'm not sure if I'm responding, to your questioning. To some extent, I couldn't call it specifically. This is the assignment that all of did. I try to be consistent. I like to challenge, but at the same time, I like to be there, or just in case that they might need. It's just they need different things, and sometimes we cannot address all of them too. But it's important that they know that it's a resource.
Can you say more about the simulation process and how do you set that up for students? I'm curious. Curiosity, by the way, is my superpower. Shazia, you spoke about curiosity. My parents started asking why when you were 3 years old and you never stopped. So that's me, yeah.
Yes, I think that, well, we use it for implementing, some clinical skills, for just, put that practical component into some, specific classes, and having the students to being able to operate, in a very similar therapy situation,
Do you set up like scenarios? Do they do it as a group? Like how is it organized?
Yeah, well, there are group people might participate, and alone, and it has been variation. Sometimes it's alone, sometimes has been in groups, sometimes has been in the modality of co-therapy, etc. Depending on what the objective are, and also the number of people, no, which is something to consider, or basically for the objective. And like whether a section is at the very beginning or is in the middle, those kind of things also we need to take into consideration.
Okay, very good. I want to move us to the next, for the sake of time, move us to the next question here. What changes, this is by Shazia, by the way, what changes or improvements would you like to see in how is systemic therapy taught and practiced in the US? Fantastic question. Thank you, Shazia.
You're welcome.
Here, I think that the topic for today is basically, just sharing, a little bit of what stories have been international students, professional, etc. So I would like to answer those questions from that perspective. I do believe that there are great things happening in our field. I think that there are a lot of people doing research. We are producing, etc. But what I still would like to see is more intersectionality in just in the US. I mean, I cannot speak for every program because evidently I have not been there, but I participate in different conferences, and then travel quite a bit, seeing, different presentations, etc. I think that it will be important to have more intentionality about incorporating different cultural perspectives in MFT programs.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe that we need to revise our curricula, our literature, assignments, and activities that expose MFT students to different cultures, different social realities, beyond a chapter or a book, etc. No? So this initiative should not only be incorporated in a multicultural class, but also apply across the entire curriculum. It is important that our students move from contextualization to practice. No, I think that sometimes, we invest a lot of our efforts in conceptualizations, in categorizing, some particular population, which, is to some extent could work. But I think that I would like to see more moving from that aspect to more practical component. How to, for example, address people from different cultures beyond just the initial interview. How to navigate, for example, when there are different beliefs in the room. Not only from therapy to clients, but among the clients too, because as a system, not everybody is the same. As we had a group of siblings, they might be raised by the same parents, but each of them are different to some extent. What I noticed just in my experience for almost 20 years teaching, that there are some students who might be potentially concerned, scared to try not to offend anybody, right? But sometimes those things happen too. And it's because it doesn't matter how much we read, we never are going to be fully proficient in each culture, right? And there are new things that are presented, in the therapy room, and we need to navigate all of those things, navigate biases, stereotypes, in the family as well as that with the therapy. So I think that I would like to see more of that, but in order to do that, it's a matter of resources too, no? So like in my case, for example, I am very intentional about collaboration, with people who come from different parts of the world. And I like that. So, at a personal level, I like to see, for example, shows from all over the world. I don't have a problem reading captions. I love it. I have music from different parts of the world. I have it with me. But that helped me, to see things in a way that somehow I can identify things that still need to be happening in our field. I have not seen that. Sometimes there is a little bit of resistance, or sometimes there is a little bit of, I don't know how to do this. No, there needs to be, for example, more collaboration with other MFT programs that involves the students too. Invite, for example, guest speakers, that are coming from different sociocultural backgrounds. I think it is important. Create, if it's possible, international courses. So one of the things that I've been doing, since I've been working, at Central is for example, created a course, in which I took students, we traveled with the students to Peru for courses about mental health, understanding mental health and families in Peru.
Like a study abroad
Exactly,
program?
a study abroad course. And I think that is important. It's a real exposure, in which you can see different social realities. You can see, how the academic system works, etc. So international collaboration it's critical, it's important. So we have all these words in our syllabus, global citizenships and diversity and this and that, but when we put it into outcome, what is exactly what we are doing? So now that depends also of, again, access to resources that we might have. Places might have more limitation than others, so that is understandable. Thankfully, nowadays, we can communicate, online. And so it's a possibility. So perhaps, having a list of all, different professionals there, who can actually are willing, to share their own experience, what they're doing with family therapy, couples work, systemic therapy in general, in different parts of the world. Because sometimes even, just to wait until one conference happens, that's once a year. So what happened with the rest of the year? So I guess that those are things to think about. Of course, I guess there is if it needs more intentional efforts, but I think that promoting collaboration, I think is critical, not only to conduct research and I think, or only for teaching purposes, but I think that, seeing in what way also that can enhance, the training of our students.
Yeah, absolutely. My colleague Sheila Rashid from the Tavistock Clinic in London, in UK, and I organized an international MFT educator gathering recently, and it was exciting to hear some of the perspectives and trends that people are noticing in their respective countries. And we also talked about collaborations and what can we build together to create awareness, public awareness about our profession, to recruit more trainers and clinicians into our field. So I will share our upcoming gathering date and registration link in the show notes. I wanted to ask Shazia her thoughts from the perspective of a PhD student. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about what would you like to see changed or improved in the ways we teach systemic therapy today?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for asking me this question because I was just wondering about that too. There are many things that I've noticed, like she mentioned, that we're doing really good work, right? But there's also this like lack of knowing from the perspective of culture and diversity. A lot of the teaching and systemic therapy, like textbooks and also models, even looking at just theories, we talk a lot about coming from a Eurocentric perspective of like white men and their families, right? Like we don't talk a lot about multiracial families with biracial couples, family with, having a person from a different culture. I think a lot of our texts only focus on like the reality or the head like the norms, which is definitely like a family who is dealing with depression where parents are close to getting divorced, but we don't talk about like what religion. We don't talk also about, I feel like faith is like something that we're as therapists are so either don't have enough knowledge or too scared to be talking about it because it becomes political at some point, right? I've also noticed as a student too that teachers often like talk a lot about intersectionalities, but we often do lack about social justice aspect of systemic therapy, also therapy in general, or also even just like if we don't talk about therapy, we can also only talk about education. To be honest with you, I had no idea about, I come from a very patriarchal society, but I did not know what patriarchy meant until I started at Adler and I realized, wow, this is what I've been dealing with. This is what my mom dealt all her life. And I'm thinking of it as culture, but no, it's the culture norm that we're thinking is norm, but is actually is a bigger problem, right? There are so many marginalized communities that we often ignore, but we are too focused on the bigger issues about, and no offense to the LGBTQIA community, but we talk a lot about them, but when it comes to the real rights of other minorities, we tend to forget. Like in my own cohort too, I'm the only Muslim person and we never talk about religion. And so this is like something that I feel like we're lacking. And I think that teachers are not intentionally, but unintentionally not realizing that. And also because they're, we all become used to something and we just keep doing the same thing over and over again. So the patterns and dynamics are good. The intentions are good, but I think there needs to be some change that needs to happen. And as a person of color, also therapist of color, I feel like it is my job to also, implement some of those changes. So my plan is when I'm actually just recently applied for the internship in the program to teach. And if I do get an opportunity to do that, my plan is to definitely have open-ended questions, and also like challenging my students to think about some of these aspects of intersectionalities and social justice, for not just the privileged community, but also marginalized population as well.
Lovely. I agree with you that we don't talk enough about spirituality and faith in our courses. I find that I'm guilty of that probably as well. I love what Dr. Melendez-Rhodes said earlier about talking about our own failures as clinicians and trainers, and talking about the things that didn't work as well, or the places that we got stuck. I am a big fan of deliberate practice. I love all of the books published by the deliberate practice team out of the NTL University and published by the APA. I will link those in the show notes, and I would like to see more emphasis on bridging theory and application in our field. I don't think there's enough of that. And when you spoke about exposing the students to more different frames of cultural understanding, spirituality, faiths, different types of faith, I was thinking of one of our colleagues, Dr. Lisa Merchant. She shared one of her syllabi with me, and I think it was a cultural diversity course, and she had intentional, what she called cultural plunges for students, where they had to deliberately pick places to go or experiences to have that they were not necessarily familiar with, and then reflect on that experience that was outside of the classroom. I would love to see something like that implemented in all of the classes, like Dr. Melendez-Rhodes said, across the curriculum, not just in the cultural diversity course.
In that, we talk about vulnerability. So at different levels, right? So being able to become vulnerable first to, it could be take an action or for self-reflection, or something might change at that moment. But that also needs to be applicable for therapists as well. No, I think it's very important to be out of our own comfort zone too. And, experience all these things, because we teach, but it's also for us as part of our own training, So I, totally agree with Shazia in some of the topics perhaps are lacking, in when it comes to teacher having conversations or discussions, no?
Yeah, sometimes I feel like we become too comfortable doing the same things over and over again, that we don't like to see change, because we're too comfortable in our spaces and in our areas of expertise, that we sometimes just decide not to explore different things, or different things that are even around us that are happening, and we just like close our eyes on those things because we say that, oh, that's not my specialty. Not everything has to be your specialty, but you can always be curious and be open to learn and appreciate other cultures and other people from different diverse backgrounds.
Yeah, agreed. We're gonna go ahead and wrap up our conversation here. I want to say a big thank you to our fantastic guests, Dr. Tatiana Melendez-Rhodes and
Thank you,
Shazia Imran, for sharing their experiences on teaching and learning marriage and family therapy. I hope their wisdom and experiences will help our fellow educators and listeners on their own academic career journey. Dr. Melendez-Rhodes, how can listeners interested in your work reach out to you?
Well, I am at Central Connecticut State University, and in the Marriage and Family Therapy program, I am the program coordinator. I can share with you the link.
Okay, fantastic. Sure.
I'll be more than happy to connect with, students or the faculty.
Fantastic. And Shazia, how can listeners interested in your work reach out to you?
So I can definitely share my practicum site where clients can reach out. But if there are other people that are interested, like a colleague, I can also share my personal email as well as my institution email at Adler.
Wonderful. Okay, we're going to add those to the show notes. To our listeners, we hope you found today's discussion enlightening and inspiring. If you're hungry for more engaging conversations and lessons learned about teaching systemic therapy, be sure to follow our Learning and Teaching Systemic Therapy podcast on Spotify and everywhere where podcasts are available. We have podcast episodes coming up every month, so stay tuned. At STMFT, we believe in the power of mentorship and the importance of representation in education. If you're interested in becoming a part of our mission or you're seeking guidance, please visit our website at stmft.coastmft.org. Also consider joining our Facebook group, www.facebook.com/groups/STMFT. Thank you for joining us today, and until next time, keep connecting and learning with colleagues. This is Dr. Sofia Georgiadou signing off for STMFT's Learning and Teaching Systemic Therapy.